Antec makes a bunch of stuff because they can, and they approached me to plan a video in which I can showcase a few of these bunch of stuff they make. So I was like, build time, baby! Baby? What baby? Hey everyone, Mukul here. So I rarely do a build video, and the primary reason behind it is because of the fact that I only have one system. So some of the components I have to use from my primary system to make such build videos, which is extremely time consuming and which tires me a lot. The main focus of this video is going to be the Antec NX700 case. Of course, I'd be showcasing the other stuff too, but I find plain old build videos without any objective to be boring. So I'm going to take this excuse and closely review my build experience also as the video progresses, and obviously also share how well or bad the Antec NX700 case performs when it comes to heat and stuff. And boy oh boy, do I have good things to say about it. Well, I chose the NX700 as in its pictures it looked like a really nice case, and luckily in reality it turned out to be the same too. I love the look of the mesh in the front of the case. The holes on the mesh aren't too tiny or too big. That said, if you live in a dusty environment, you should expect dust to accumulate inside the case, of course over time, as there is no other filter behind the mesh panel. But that also means more frigging air inside. The fiber parts on the front panel has a pretty edgy design, but they managed to not overdo it. The face of the case is wider than your typical mid-tower cases, and this is the reason why it comes with two 185mm RGB fans on the front. The depth isn't extremely long though, so the wide front and the short depth did make me curious how the build experience would be with an ATX motherboard and a huge RTX 3080 Ti. Now I'm not going to read each and every spec already listed on the website, so I will just share with the build experience how the NX700 truly feels like when I started to fill it up with stuff. What stuff? But I do want to mention that there is no reset button on the case, but apart from that you have all the ports and one power button on the top of the case. And the case does have magnetic dust filters on the top and bottom with your typical sized holes all over them. But the size of the holes underneath these dust filters is quite large. Clearly Antec has made sure to let either all the air in or all the air out from the NX700. Both the right and left hand side panel screws are locked, but the screws were pretty tight and I had to use a screwdriver to unscrew them. The tempered glass is pretty thick, and the thick stuff lovers out there would love it until they drop it and break it. Now the motherboard I am going to use for this build was sent by MSI, and it is the MSI X50S Edge Max Wi-Fi with no more words after the word Wi-Fi. The motherboard is packed with a lot of features and also looks gorgeous with these black and grey accents all over it. It's really nice to see them give such seamless design continuity throughout the many heatsinks on the board. I plan to thoroughly test the motherboard in a separate video, but to highlight, it has 3 M.2 Gen 4 slots and they all have their own sweet heatsink. Yeah, I kinda tasted them. Not. And it also supports Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth right out of the box, as it of course came inside of a box. The NX700 case can support two 2.5-inch SSDs on the back and on the front, making a total of 4 on the motherboard tray, and it can also take in two 3.5-inch hard disk drives that can also accommodate two 2.5-inch SSDs if you don't like the old and ancient hard disk drives and you have ample money. On the back of the motherboard tray there are a decent amount of slits and holes to help you manage cables if you like spending time on that. The power supply used for this build is again by Antec. The Atom 750G is a 750 watt gold rated power supply which is completely modular. The cables provided are of course not of the best quality, which is expected to be the case in this price segment. But hey, these cables are modular, so yay. In my testing later, it was able to run the Furmark stress test with Cinebench R23 test together without tripping for over 15 minutes, and during the test the system was withdrawing approximately 500 watts of power, so this was definitely a good sign for the power supply overall. That said, I really can't go and recommend this power supply for serious overclockers. For the price, the Atom G750 will do a fine job for the processors up to Ryzen 5s or the Intel i5s, and let's assume that GPUs up to 3060 Ti will be able to run comfortably on this power supply for the long run. The power supply does come with 5 years of warranty, which kinda assures that they must have filled it with at least mid-tier components inside. Few of the cables that came with the G750 had labels printed on them denoting which side will go into the power supply. For the PCIe cables, the thinner LOX end will go into the power supply side and the thicker ones will go on your GPU. Antec also has a decently big catalog of sleeved cables that do come in multiple color options. The cable combs are opaque and of black plastic material, but you have to put them on the cables yourself. So you definitely have some work to do here. But that gives you the freedom if you need a single comb or multiple combs on the bends of the cables across the platform. Antec claims the cables are 16 AWG, so the cables should happily carry 13 amperes of current through them. And as per my first impressions, the cables do appear to be of solid build quality. They are also quite rigid, so forming and shaping them will be quite easy. Now I will never be going to stress test them, but I do strongly feel that Antec did a good job with them here. And for the price, it's really nice to have one more option in the market. I mean, more colors to play with. I'm going to use my personal Ryzen 9 3900X for this build, and the AIO I'm going to use to cool it down is the Antec Symphony 240 ARGB. It's a pretty nice looking AIO with a chunky pump which has a mirror finish on it, with of course some RGB elements over it. And I'm going to say this again, that I'm going to make a separate video on this where I would compare its performance against its bigger brother, the Symphony 360. And as I don't like repeating stuff twice, this is all I'm going to say about this AIO in this video. But of course I will be sharing some numbers ahead of how this AIO performs inside of this case. So the motherboard sat easily inside the case, and it was good to see some nice top margin because of the taller profile of the case. After putting in the chip, I put the two XPG RAMs in and then proceeded to install an M.2 drive on the topmost M.2 slot on the motherboard. I chose this to make the drive sit as far from the GPU as possible, as sometimes long distance relationships are just better. To install a 2.5-inch SSD on the back, I simply unscrewed the metal plate and then screwed the SSD on it, and then just screwed the metal plate back on the motherboard tray. I know, just too much screwing. The PSU shroud again has these ample wide holes on the top in case you want to put the power supply fan facing up, and it also has some wide slits for managing cables that might come from the bottom of the motherboard. The power supply was a bit tough to squeeze in with the cables hooked into it, but thankfully I could use a bit of my Hulk force and got it in. And when I was doing the typical stuff of putting all the cables in, the top two slots on the motherboard tray helped me the most in sorting and managing the many cables no one likes sorting during a PC build. The GPU I'm going to put inside the case is the Asus TUF 3080 Ti OC, and the case had no problems gulping it down. And don't be dumb like me and just be careful which grill you poke out of these slots as you install a GPU inside. Once it has been poked out, you can't stick it back again unless you are some sort of welder. But then you don't have to worry about it anyway, as Antec has made sure to supply a few extra slots covers for such mistakes you or I specifically might make. And don't let the GPU bracket fixture confuse you. It is supposed to go inside of the case and not outside like this. Yeah, I got fooled here for a minute. But the GPU will definitely need screws on it if you want it to avoid any sort of saggy life. Also, with how the fan cables were already sorted in the case, I was easily able to daisy chain the rear fan, the front fans and the AIO pump together and put them on a single ARGB header on the motherboard. But yeah, none of these case fans are PWM, so you can't control their speed. And ta-da! After a couple of days of shooting and planning, the build was finally complete. I do love how the case turned out to be in the end. The light from the fans fall nicely on the edgy designed mesh on the front. The two 185mm fans are ample bright and the rear one isn't bad either. But yeah, you can only control the lighting on these by the one button on the top of the case, and you can't really sync the lights of these case fans with your motherboard. But the options might feel ample if you are a simple RGB layout user like me. The AIO also complements the overall layout. And somehow I was able to match the sleeved cable colors with the power supply's purple too. And of course, as you can notice, the sleeved cables do put a nice touch for the overall aesthetics of the build. Now, where the case excels more is how well it performed thermally for the components inside of it. As you can see, there was hardly any difference in temperatures when I ran the Cinebench R23 test with stock settings on the CPU, both when the left-hand side panel of the case was on and off. And when I overclocked the CPU to run all cores at 4.1 GHz, which started eating as much as 165 watt of power, the temperature on the chip were again similar with the side panel on and off. But when I ran the Furmark stress test at 1440p to stress the GPU's thermals, there were definitely few improvements in the temperatures when the side panel was off. Well, this definitely denotes that this massive 3080 Ti doesn't want to live inside any case, as the story was similar in my primary Cooler Master MB520 case too. And when I stress tested both the CPU and GPU together with the side panel on and off, the difference then turned out to be quite considerable for the CPU, and a solid 4 degrees difference was there with the GPU too. But I'm not sure how many of us actually use applications or games that constantly use 100% of CPU and GPU together for a consistent amount of time. So was this test worthless? Nope. And these are the max temperatures across all these tests, when the average ambient temperatures throughout was 29.5 degrees Celsius. The fans on the NX700 are pretty silent even when they are always running at full speed, and the front ones of course are of 185 mm in size. I must have repeated this 185 times by now. So yeah, for the price, the NX700 has definitely become one of my favorite cases, seeing how well and thoughtful it has been overall built and how much love it generally has for the air around it. And because of this reason, if you are someone who uses a lot of air coolers in their builds or PCs, then this case will be suitable for that sort of a scenario. But if you are someone who lives around a more than average dusty environment, then do note that with all the lovely air, the case might also not fail to gulp a lot of tiny dust particles inside of it. As except for that mesh panel at the front, there is no other layer of any kind of dust filter, which could have helped filter out some of these dust particles that no one but the other dust particles love. Dust particles, they love each other. So this is about it. Well, this video took me a lot of time to make, so share it around with the world and kind of make me famous. No? Alright. Also, if you end up buying any of these components, then for that you can use the affiliate links in the description below. You can also hop onto our Discord server for more chit chat on relevant content. So stay safe, humans. Mewbot, after a long 2 weeks for planning for this video, out. Or maybe 3 weeks by now.